Hello, my name is Wolf, and I am a Thromboyan chieftain of the greatest nation on the planet of Degum, the Thromboyan Union, a proud and pure nation of tribal warriors. We're currently at war with many other nations and factions, but the most notable of which is the Confederacy of Banya, our arch nemesis. We've been on the back foot of these wars for far, far too long. It's time that the Union was under new leadership so that we could take our rightful place back as the leaders on a global scale. Long ago, before humans found their way to this planet, the Thromboyans were the one and only true pure species. Their civilizations and technologies were far more advanced than anything that this world has ever seen since. But after the tumbling of several cataclysmic dominoes, we reverted to a tribal state along with the humans. They've taken everything from us in an attempt to live in harmony, as they call it. But this is something that we cannot stand for. However, every good revolution needs a base of operations, and thus we are going to begin by collecting some of the planet's precious resources, such as lumber, to go about building one. We're also going to be collecting wild berries and other foods to survive off of for the time being, as well as collecting some wild medicines to protect ourselves from infections and disease. To begin, we're going to be building ourselves some small wooden canopies along with a campfire. Now, I know this doesn't look like much, hardly the beginning of a revolution, but trust me, we will be building something very big very soon. You see, the lands of this planet are littered with the ancient ruins of the lost Thromboyan civilizations from long since past, and we've decided to begin deconstructing those to build our new home and our new civilization that will be much better than anything before. To reclaim the lost glory of our species, we're going to first build ourselves a capital building, a planning ground for our revolution, something that I believe I'll be referring to as something of a citadel, I suppose you could call it. A large fortress made from the finest marble materials that our ancestors have to offer. On the upper floor, we're going to have ourselves a meeting hall where we will be planning out all of our revolution, from the invasions that we plan on carrying out, resource alignment, and other things that I can't think of at the moment. And with that, it's finally completed, or at least the upper hull for now, and the external portions, built on a mighty foundation, as all good things should be. As for the name of our mighty settlement under the Thromboyan Union, we will be naming it Ancestors Landing. And I mention that because we are still part of the Union for now. And though in the very near future we still plan on carrying out our mission under the name of the Thromboyan Union, our faction, our government, and our civilization will be very, very much different than the current Union. Finally, one that we are proud to carry out our mighty mission under, even if that means we have to take the current one by force. But before we can make that dream a reality, we still have a lot of work to do. For example, we need to build some proper storage here in the old Citadel. Not only are we going to be building plenty of big wooden shelves to store all of our goods on, but we're also going to be making ourselves something of a cellar and or crawl space where we can store excess resources and items away from the prying eyes of any visitors. The next thing we're going to be building is something of a small barracks, just temporarily for the time being, as it sure as shit beats the hell out of sleeping outside. We were also in dire need of a proper tribal kitchen equipped with a nice campfire where we can cook our meals, as well as some food storage barrels. It felt ever so nice to finally destroy our old shabby camp, and we could finally come inside to a nice sturdy home. We would also focus on growing ourselves some food, that way when winter comes around we don't have to rely on trading with the main government government or other factions for it. We ended up having a transport pod crash nearby the Citadel, and upon further inspection, it appears to be a Thromboian, but this wasn't anyone that was part of the Confederacy of Banya or the Union. No, this appears to be some sort of civilian contractor from the Republic of Libertas, yet another faction on the planet that is predominantly made up of humans, but also lives in harmony with all races. Yeah, sure. This poor Thromboian child led astray away from the great truth of our ancestors into the loving hands of the enemy's swine. We shall tend to her wounds and bring her back home where we can show her the truth. Though no doubt it's going to take quite a while to get past years of brainwashing with some brainwashing of our own, so we'll check back in on her in a little while. In the meantime, we're going to put a heavy focus on collecting plenty of resources such as stone blocks, as we're going to be cutting these from all the chunks in the area. This was ever so briefly interrupted when we were attacked by a maddened squirrel, but I'd be lying if I said that it was really worth mentioning. I mentioned it anyways though. Anyhow though, the reason that we've been collecting up all of our stone blocks is because we plan on making a very long and sturdy bridge across this gigantic ass river between our citadel and the mainland. This will make traversing the nearby area much easier, even more so when we end up building ourselves a little bit of a packed dirt path through the area as well. Much easier for trade caravans to arrive and also to trade with us, and also for us to leave. But after that, we ended up having someone by the name of Quinn who was saying that they were being held prisoner by the Confederacy of Banya, and that if we were to rescue them, they would be willing to join us. Naturally, of course, we would accept this offer. We're not one to turn down a Thromboian in need. Well, we assume they're a Thromboian. We couldn't exactly see what they looked like, and if they're not and they're human, we might just enslave them. But upon our arrival at the camp, it does indeed seem that they are a Thromboian. Along with them, though, are some of the Confederacy's finest soldiers with their scrap and makeshift rifles. The tribes of the Confederacy know no purity or tradition anymore, and this is the exact reason that they must be cleansed. As the two soldiers approached, we rushed to cover behind some nearby ruins. Though our bow and arrow would deal much more damage than their rifles could inflict, the chance of us hitting them more times than they hit us were quite low, so we had to get up close and personal to finish this off. And after a few slashes and gashes from the old scythe, we were victorious. We would also take their weapons to ensure that nobody else gets their hands on them, and we would also offer a sweet and savory rescue to Quinn, who would quickly, as you could imagine, join us. It would seem that Quinn was already part of the greater Thromboian Union faction, and he will now be joining us as a member of the Citadel. After we all had finally returned home, we started on a new project, using the most abundant resource that we currently have at our disposal, that being stone blocks. Of course, we began crafting up plenty of hatchets. Not only would these be good tools to defend yourself with, but this is also a great tool for cutting down wood. The idea here is that we're going to be selling these as a way to make plenty of silver, as every great revolution requires a bit of funding. And in the meantime, we're also going to be building some proper homes for all of our soldiers and other members. Nothing too fancy, just some residential areas that are all connected, that way they can share the heat with some decent furniture. Perfect timing as well, because not too long after that, we would also finally recruit the Thromboian known as Twiggy, who had fallen in the transport pod, and we have converted her to the light of our ancestors. I'm sure that the rebels from the Republic of Libertas will not like this, as we're currently already at war with them, and this is only going to further the tension. So we're going to need to start mounting a pretty decent defensive position around the Citadel if we hope to survive, as I'm sure they won't take kidnapping and ideological conversion all that well. But first, we have a very large stockpile of our hatchets to go about selling, and lucky enough for us, it would seem that the main Union government has sent a war merchant to us to purchase all of these hatchets. Although I must say that after selling all of our current inventory, I was less than satisfied with our compensation, as you can see. We were hoping to make buku bucks, but it looks like we're only making scraps. Perhaps we should try art next time once we have someone with the proper skill set. Since we're not exactly exactly making our fortune when it comes to stone weaponry, we've also decided to begin planting a field of cash crop. In this particular instance, we're going to be sowing some cotton, that way we can harvest it and sell all the cloth. Now, I did briefly touch on the fact that we're trying to make a lot of money, that way we can fund our revolution against the government, and that way we can take over, but to be honest with you, to be a bit more specific, we really just need to purchase firearms. Now, in previous years, the Union and its people have been completely opposed to these human-made weapons, but to combat humans as well as our enemies in the Confederacy, we have to. Speaking of other things that we'd have to do, we have to go about upgrading our little prison because the little wooden shack hole thing that we made previously just wasn't cutting it in terms of quality for our prisoners, and thus as to why it took forever to recruit Twiggy. Our big muscly compadre Abanir here actually has a pretty high artistic skill, with it being a skill level of 7, and since earlier I mentioned that maybe we should try some art instead of weapons, I think that's exactly what we'll do. We would even allow Gray to help him out here and there, though her artistic skill is obviously much lower. Every little bit of sculpturing helps out. A bit later on, and we ended up having a wanderer by the name of Dodo who was offering to join us here completely free of charge, and every able-bodied soldier we can get to this revolution we will take. After her arrival though, we had an unusual cold snap set in late fall. Seems pretty usual to me, but okay. We were none too concerned with the abnormal freezing temperatures, we just simply built a few more burning torches in our bedrooms to keep us nice and warm. Unfortunately, the biggest issue is that it killed off all of our crops like our rice, which wasn't too big of an issue realistically because we could always hunt wild game, but that does mean that our cash crop of cotton is going to have to wait until spring. Speaking of cash though, we've decided to travel out to one of the main government settlements not too far from our home to do a little bit of trading with all of the hatchets that we made, as well as, more importantly, the sculptures that we've been creating, getting us a pretty penny racked in. We're really beginning to make quite the little stockpile of silver here. We should be able to purchase quite a few firearms with what we already have. But even if we do have enough firearms, we're going to get absolutely creamed and canned if we don't have proper defenses around the Citadel, and that's exactly why we began building some around our bridge entrance as well as the opposite side of the Citadel itself. And now, since we're becoming a proper community within the faction, I thought a proper road coming into our little community here would be quite fitting. That way we at least look the part, and for many days we would trade and bide our time. For what, you may ask? Well, we would wait for the Marshal Service. They're not exactly what I would call allies, they're a bunch of freaky fascists, and they also believe in racial purity, but only for humans, kinda like we do for our own Thromboian race. But they are an ally of circumstance to us because they, just as we, hate the rebels of the Republic of Libertas, as well as the Confederacy of Binya, and that is the exact reason as to why they are willing to sell us a few firearms. Finally, with these bad boys, though they be made of scrap and other shitty materials, we can do some damage, some real damage. Our ancestors did not take hold of this planet by using sticks and stones. No, they advanced in technologies, and as shall we. Even if these weapons are not of our own design, they are exactly what we need to take over, and to be able to truly fight back properly. Now that we have the weapons and we also have the numbers, it's time for us to plan out our very first attack. Near our border with the Confederacy, it would seem that they've set up a hunting work site just downriver from us a little bit. Now that it's winter time, the thick snow will cause us to take quite a while to arrive there on foot. But we don't plan on going on foot. Utilizing the wood that we've been chopping down, we are going to build ourselves some rowboats. These rowboats will easily allow us to travel down river over the frigid, freezing waters all the way down to this little hunting site much faster, I might add, than trying to make the journey on foot or even mounted on animals. As dawn began to break under the cover of a stormy morning, we would slowly and cautiously cautiously approached the shoreline. As we had finally crept around their defenses and around their structures, we would throw caution to the wind and begin firing at their door to bust it wide open. Within were a couple of filthy hunting heretics who thought that they could stand against us. Unfortunately for them, they were dead wrong. With what few hunters there were here completely dead, that means that we're going to be able to reap the rewards that they were going to take back home for ourselves and for our own community, which was perfect because we could really use some food for winter. And with that, it was time for us to take our spoils of war back upriver to the Citadel. This was a great achievement, though our war with the Confederacy still easily rages on and will continue to do so for quite a while. I think today we've proven to ourselves that we can take them on. But conquering the Confederacy is merely going to be our first step, as we still have to worry about our own government. In an attempt to make some new allies who may eventually need to come to our aid, we began trying to do some trading with many of the villages and towns and tribes in the Outlands, bettering our relationships with them as well as our wallets. Now, with all this newly found money though, we would actually be able to hire some like-minded Thrumboians to set up some new settlements for the Union, but only for our chapter, as it were. We need to ensure that we know where their loyalty truly lies at the end of the day when the shit hits the fan, you could say. We're also going to begin arming them with some like-minded weaponry, a makeshift rifle, as well as some pretty shabby fatigues, you could say. It's time that we came out of the tribal era and into a more modern look and fighting force. Perfect timing to begin arming some soldiers, as it looks like the Confederacy is here to claim revenge for their hunting site being destroyed. And it looks like there's quite a few of them this time around. Luckily, our new settlements and bases were ready at a moment's notice, armed and willing. However, as we awaited their arrival, we would have to do this on our own, mounting a defense against the filthy Confederacy soldiers. We were far outnumbered and becoming easily overwhelmed. This would force us to begin making a retreat to the western side of the Citadel. It would seem that we may have underestimated the retaliatory efforts of our enemies. As we were making our retreat, unfortunately, Wolf would be shot to the ground, injured and bleeding profusely, crawling away in a puddle of his own blood. But he would have to wait, as jumping out to rescue him right now would be a death sentence. We would have to fight our way out of this. A standoff would ensue near the Citadel with the Confederacy soldiers. We began making our way a bit closer, where eventually we would finally kill enough of them that they began to retreat, or at least what was left of them. With our enemies running away, we would now need to begin tending to Wolf's wounds to ensure that he wouldn't bleed to death. And just as well, we also had a few Confederacy members who we thought could use a little bit of rehabilitation in more ways than just their injuries. Perhaps we can help them see the light that is their heritage as Thrumboians. But before we continue our glorious mission and takeover of these lands, we are going to need to heal for a little bit of time. Once we finally had an adequate amount of rest and our wounds had finally scabbed over and we weren't bleeding profusely anymore, we actually began working on a new residential quarter as well as a dining hall with a kitchen and food storage area. Early on, using our Citadel as a kitchen and barracks is completely fine, but nowadays, now especially since we have a higher population and we're really beginning to form into our own little faction, I think it would be best to only use it as a base of operations and headquarters. And sticking with our theme of upgrading technologically, but also still somewhat being tribal, we are actually going to make a form of power production, but we are going to be using the beautiful planet of Degum's natural resources to do so, and I'm not talking about wood or coal. We are going to be using the rapids of the river to generate our power, and we're only going to be using it for the most necessary components of our survival, such as cooking meals, that way we don't get food poisoning and we're all well nourished to fight battles battles and to conquer. And as is tradition with our tribe, we are going to continue using our mother planet's wonderful wildlife to go about making our clothing and our meals as well, of course. Though a bit hard to see, we are wearing our more modern looking fatigues underneath our armored leotards and our animal skin hoods. Slowly but surely we continue to integrate more and more with the modern times, unlike our other tribal counterparts, while also keeping our culture and our heritage intact. As mentioned previously, we are no longer going to be using our Citadel fortress for any type of production or barracks or anything like that, and thus why we're also creating a small area here for all of our stone cutting needs as well as art production needs. Not to worry though, as we are still going to be keeping a bit of our storage inside the Citadel for the time being, as it is still currently the safest place for all of our products. We are also going to be collecting and harvesting all of our cloth that we've been growing for quite some time finally, now that spring has sprung. With that being said, we're going to be traveling a little bit to the west to trade with our official government counterparts. I'm still not quite as sure what we should be calling them, but anyhow, we are going to be selling them plenty of artworks as well as the cloth that we've harvested to make a decent bit of silver. And with all this money, we would actually be able to hire more like-minded Thrumboians from nearby villages and towns to go out and settle more bases for us. With us lining the pockets of these villagers and warriors, we now have quite the little militia, allowing us to begin attacking the Confederacy settlements. And while this is absolutely awesome and great and a huge milestone, this is still but the beginning. As you can see, it takes all of the soldiers in our militia currently to simply take over one settlement of the Confederacy, and this just so happens to be a much weaker one. Now, there's currently a lot going on the world map and in the world in general, but you may notice that we have some highways beginning to form out of not only our settlements, but the main government settlements as well, and this may seem a little odd, but we are currently working hand in hand with the RimWorld Marshal Service to build some proper infrastructure. Now, they may be filthy humans, but they are currently the ally of our allies, and thus they are our ally as well, so we might as well let them, I suppose. With things really going our way, and with a decent-sized militia under our control, I think that it might be time for us to get our hands dirty once and for all with the Confederacy. Playtime's over, bitches. We are immediately going to be making our way south to meet up with our militia members to go about attacking a nearby Confederacy resource depot. Now, all things considered, this is actually a pretty decent-sized base for the Confederacy, although there aren't all that many soldiers compared to a normal village, so it may be the perfect opportunity for us. Upon our arrival into the area, we would immediately send out the signal to nearby units to assist. These grizzled men and women are some of our finest soldiers, and though their weapons are not really up to par for planetary standards just as ours, they are still just as deadly. Under the cover of night and the shadows of darkness, they would begin to infiltrate the camp, opening fire on its members. We could hear the gunshots ringing out in the distance as we began making our way towards the chaos, the blunt roars of our warriors echoing throughout the hills nearby. As the fighting was going on, many fires had broken out around some of the nearby wooden structures. This would essentially make it impossible to hit our enemies at times, as the smoke was becoming so thick in some areas, at times it felt like we were blindly firing. But even so, we had used our element of surprise, and with our newfound weapons, numbers, and militia members, we would finally push these Confederacy bastards out of their own village, shrieking and groaning in pain as they ran away from the area, clutching their injuries. The battle against their soldiers had finally been won, but now a new battle would begin. There's no doubt plenty of resources here, and we are now fighting against the clock to try to put out these fires before those resources are burnt up in one of these buildings. Eventually, we would find where they were hiding all of their jade and wood and even their food and different types of textiles, and we had actually managed to stomp out those fires, claiming these resources for ourselves. Not only resources, but we would also end up claiming a prisoner or two as well. After claiming our victory, we're going to be moving a little little bit to the northeast here, just up against the shoreline. And to claim this area a bit more for ourselves, we're also going to be creating a specialized outpost. This in particular is going to be a hunting outpost where we basically will have people come and live and hunt wild game. We're going to be leaving Gray behind in charge of this outpost for the time being, as she is one of our closest and most trusted soldiers. Now, you may be asking, why did we even bother setting up a hunting outpost like this? Well, not only is this hunting outpost going to provide our main base at the Citadel with some wild game meat and feeding us throughout winter and what have you, but also all of our little villages and bases here in this area. And you'll also notice that I did specifically set it up here on the shoreline, and the reason for that is so that if we were wanting to take our vessels, like our little rowboats for example, down the river, we could actually meet at this base with our militia members. Essentially, it is a hunting outpost, but also a strategic military base as well, especially since it's also on the border of the Confederacy's territory. Now that we're finally back home, it's time for us to begin taking care of the more boring and bureaucratic issues of our little faction here. As the chieftain and/or lord of this chapter of the Union, that means that I am going to be responsible not only for killing our enemies and conquering new territories, but also for infrastructure and developing these villages and bases that we're setting up. The vast majority of our new villages are actually going to be exporting their timber, as it is the most abundant resource that they all currently have, with them being in a temperate forest, of course. After several days of setting up these logging camps, once they were finally complete, as you can see, we are making a very good bit of silver in taxes from our new villages. And this is the exact type of funding that we've been striving for this entire video to fund our revolution. But there can always be more, of course. The more the merrier, as they say. Besides, before we can inspire our fellow Union soldiers to rise up against the Union itself, we're going to need to make our name for ourselves, and of course the best way to go about doing so is to completely demolish the Confederacy. And as our power and influence continues to grow and get stronger, this will become much simpler and much easier to do, and eventually we will indeed topple them. Back at the home base, as you can see, I've made quite a few upgrades off camera as I was waiting for all of our settlement takeovers to happen, as well as our logging camps to be built, although it's just mostly some defense upgrades and new defenses with barricades, as well as adding in a few new roads for anyone coming and leaving the area. Nothing too spectacular. But my friends, as we're winding down to the end of the video here, I want to thank you all ever so much for watching. I can't tell you how good it feels to be back playing in the RKRU, especially as Thromboians, for what I believe is the very first time. I mean, we've played as the pawn Thromboian, like the race before, but never as an actual faction, never as a tribe or anything like that, so this is a pretty big milestone in our shared universe here. And it's also a hell of a lot of fun, I must say. I would also like to inquire about a little bit of assistance. I like our Citadel, don't get me wrong, but the name the Citadel is very reminiscent in universe of the Citadel that was built in the Outlands by the S&R Rifle Company just a few years ago. So we need something a little bit different to help set us apart from those filthy humans, I think, do we not? So I would like to ask you guys for any name suggestions, as well as any suggestions in general, mods, or where you'd like to see the series taken and stuff like that, of course, but in particular, a name for the Citadel. If you have suggestions, I'd very much appreciate it. But my friends, I will see you in the very near future. Until next time.